Hello, internet friends, and welcome to Keep the Game Moving. And this time, have I ever played in a game you GM'd? I don't.
I don't. You know what? That's a good question. I don't think so.
Wow. Oh no, there was that one you did for your friends that Mark and I. The like 2-session.
Okay.
Was that? No, it wasn't. I don't remember what it was. It was some D&D thing. But my old friend Thomas Koch, who is one of the masterminds behind Quests and Chaos, where I run Cthulhu and he runs D&D, and all sorts of zany things happen. They have a Kickstarter for the Deck of Inspiration, they're calling it, going on right now, and we're going to talk more about that as we talk about using inspiration in your game. But Thomas, how'd you get your start GMing?
So I got my start GMing awfully in junior high. I don't think, I think that I ran arena combats. It was essentially theater of the mind miniature games. And it was just two of us, right? So it was just a friend of mine and me, and it was terrible. It was just awful. It was all of D. It was just the combat portion of D&D, without any of the tactics or anything.
And so it was always just two of you. You didn't. Did your group grow at all, or like high school?
No. I really didn't GM until we started the channel, and we started a show.
Right.
Running Waterdeep Dragon Heist. That was. I should say that was my second time DMing. So I ran Horde of the Dragon Queen for about 6 or 7 sessions before, half the party moved away and we just decided not to continue. Because at that point we didn't really think of, let's remotely play D&D. It just didn't occur to us.
Yeah, that's right. It was that would be a totally foreign concept. Like, so Thomas and I were in a 3-year? Longer than
3
that?
years.
3 years.
3 years, 28 levels.
Yeah, we were in a 3-year a mega D&D campaign that I think set the bar really high for my expectations of, like, this is a group that's going to play this game, because we were almost all there almost every week. And actually, we did have a player remotely play because one of our buddies moved to Sacramento. And did we use Skype? I think.
I think it was Skype, but it was we put a laptop at the table.
Yeah.
And and speakers and a microphone.
Yep.
And that's how they played. I mean, that was
and
well before
anybody's like, dark most of the time, so we couldn't see him.
Well, his character was also unseen most.
Yeah, that's right. He was a rogue. I never saw him. That's really interesting that you didn't really GM until fairly late. That's now, were you even before that, you were probably doing like world building stuff and things like that, because you are at heart you tell fantasy stories in all sorts of different milieu, on film and that sort of thing. And so I'm guessing that, like, you've been sort of doing that part of the whole GMing thing for a while.
Yeah. I mean, I think, throughout junior high school, college, I did way more reading of lore and world building and planning to run adventures than I ever did playing or actually running them. It's a lonely experience, but
I bought a bunch of I would buy stuff and just read it and then never run it, like that's it.
I've actually started to buy some of those old second edition books like the Pirates of the Sea of Fallen Stars, or I think that there was a Beholder book, but
what was the Undermountain box? There was like a Descent into Undermountain or something.
Yeah, I think it was just Undermountain. It was like this.
Yeah,
I think it was really thick.
It was I got that for like to read on the plane when I was going home from college.
After Waterdeep Dragon Heist, we were going to run Dungeons of the Mad Mage as like sort of the companion. This takes you to level 20. And just after reading it, I don't want to do 14 levels of a dungeon crawl. That just sounds horrible.
and like sometimes you can't leave, so you're sort of
Yeah.
jammed in there. It's a whole mess. Um, so Quests and Chaos is a streaming channel, and I think to me, one of the impressive things is your commitment to like having folks in studio with like professional lighting, and because in your real life you are a professional videographer. Is that the appropriate term? I want to make sure.
It's not, but that's
All right.
okay. Well, before pandemic, I was director of photography.
There
So,
we go.
but a lot of that was commercial and corporate work where, it's setting up for an interview, we're doing a documentary. It wasn't, there was some film work and television work, but most of it was digital marketing, that kind of stuff. But it's all sort of
Yeah.
the same stuff.
Hey, it's a
Just
gig.
budgets are different.
And so what was, I don't know, how did you get the idea to start this streaming studio? And
So Amy and I want to make our own narrative content. We were really inspired by Felicia Day back in the mid 2000s, with the Guild, and then with her Dragon Age sponsored content. That's really, was sort of the that's where we want to go. People give us money to make fantasy content. That sounds great.
yeah, that's a great gig.
So I mean, so that's where we wanted to go. That was the early inspiration. And we had done web series before. One was about a theater, the other was about college kids, and trying to kind of put those things together. We are shot and in process of a fantasy web series called Mage Haven that we shot too many years ago, but we're still plugging away at it. I'm getting James to learn how to do 3D animation so that we can finish some of these episodes.
All those torches.
Yeah. Oh God. Yeah. That's all been done for 5 years, and we're waiting on the next, step. But so we want to do that, but we really realize that produced content requires money to pay post-production, because that is the most time-consuming part that will definitely go down if you have money to pay for it. So we kind of came down to the realization that a 10-minute episode of a web series, to do it right and quick and done, is at minimum $10,000, and realistically, to get in a TV world, is $100,000 for that 10 minutes. It was a little out of reach, a little bit, just a little bit out of reach. So before I was running Horde of the Dragon Queen, I started watching a YouTube channel called The Dice Stormers, which is sort of Ben Loomis, who makes Sirenscape, was on that. And that was sort of their kickoff to him building that out and getting, exposure. But they were running Horde of the Dragon Queen, and I was listening, and they were fun. Production quality was terrible. They put a sheet up behind, to block off their kitchen, one camera, but the people were great. The storytelling was good, and it was really useful for me as a new DM to kind of learn how somebody else had directed or, DM'd Horde of the Dragon Queen. And then they fell off right about the same time that we fell off. Like, the whole book kind of falls apart at a certain chapter. I believe it's chapter 4. And you have to just like cut it by a 10th and just say, this is what is happening. Let's just get through this.
And so did you, like, when you hit that point, did you start homebrewing stuff, or did you sort of start adapting what was there, or did you just say like, and we're done?
I was right on the cusp of that chapter. And like in the book, it tells you to set it up, by randomly rolling, and they get, NPCs to interact with, and there's 40 NPCs to work through. And so I think I'm like, hey, I need a week. And then we're going to move, half the party was going to move. And we just kind of thought, let's just forget it. 'Cause this chapter sucks so bad. And I didn't realize at that time that I could have just cut it.
Right.
I was looking at other people's solutions online for how they fixed it, and they all added stuff, to make it more interesting and and really, now thinking about it, I would just cut it down to one session where you travel from here to there, and it takes 45 days. And just
Yeah,
be
and you
done.
can redline it as the
Yeah.
the Indiana Jones style. Yeah, that that's one of the interesting things with because I almost like I tend to prefer to run mostly torn apart printed properties, but
Right.
you like I'm not sure. Like, my problem is I don't look at anything and go, I don't think that's very good. I look at it and I go, well, let's see what happens. And sometimes that's great, and most of the time, I could maybe be a little more judicious in that. And so that's actually, I think, an important skill to be able to like figure out. Wait a minute, this is not going to work. And knowing that like what your table wants versus what this is going to give you and that sort of thing. That's because that is, I think every printed anything has at least one bit that's like, well, I don't know, and
And some more than others.
yes, some more than others. And that does take time if you're gonna, if you're gonna reconfigure something, or if you're gonna like make a separate part of it, that sort of thing. And that's actually where reading old stuff can come in handy, because you can be like, oh, wait a minute, there was a cool thing in like Against the Slavers that I could throw in here or something,
Right.
like, and so even if you're doing like your own totally homemade game, read lots of stuff and steal from it. Like, steal scenes. You don't have to use the whole book, but just that's a scene I really like. Or even steal NPCs. That can be super useful. So the game that you're running now on stream, the Chaos Agents, this is all homebrew.
Yeah. All homebrew and in progress.
Well, yeah, and happening as we speak, but and probably being written like week to week as we speak, maybe.
Yeah, and that's an interesting concept in itself. I'm really into murder mysteries, and there just isn't enough out there. And it's also, obviously Agatha Christie is sort of the staple, and those all kind of have similar, problems in that, oh, it's a bunch of people together and one of them did it. Okay. And then looking at, well, okay, so if they're not like a potential suspect, how do they do it? And then you get into more of the procedurals, the Law and Orders in the castle type
So
of thing.
how do you defeat Detect Lie? Or what is it now? Zone of Truth, I guess, is what the
haven't encountered it yet, so that's you know what? Nobody. Well, I've got a paladin, but nobody's a cleric, so I think
that's handy.
That'll help, right?
Yeah. Because
it's
like
also
it's the old joke about like, when you watch a movie and you're like, boy, if only they'd made one phone call, the whole movie unravels. And sort of the challenge of doing a D&D procedural. Although I think also the interesting part, like for me, I'd almost want to CSI this and like go into the mechanics of how they use magic to like figure this out.
There's the Speak with Dead, I think, is a big one, right? That's the well, if you think that I think, starting off with the caveat of, was this person murdered?
Right.
And then if so, why don't we just ask them who did it? Right.
But who knows what they saw,
Right. And there's also, you have a couple of caveats there. A, you have to have a body, and B, the body has to be willing, or the soul has to be willing to tell you things. So at least that there can be an out to say, you know what, it's just not going to work here. You're going to have to find a different way.
Yeah, I'll be honest. I actually think like a true investigative D&D thing is actually kind of interesting to me. Just to like give them the weird magical toys to try and figure
Mhm.
out a mystery and sort of see what they can do with that. That's an intriguing concept. I mean, the other challenge, of course, being like your characters are first level, I'm guessing.
Second, and by the
Second.
time they really get into the murder mystery, they'll be third level.
Okay. And so there's a weird sort of like they don't have access to the toys yet kind of thing.
Right.
And and then it's not as much fun when you're like, let's hire somebody to do the cool thing as opposed to let's do the cool thing.
Right. We also, you also have people built characters for this campaign before I had the campaign.
Right. So the
I was actually going to
barbarian
I was going to run a different module that we had written that was a prequel to that web series that we're working on. But the way that that is structured and the characters that the players wanted to play, they would literally have TPK'd themselves in the first show. and it was I was like, I can't do that.
Right.
I mean, I'm going to give something away that if COVID had not done what it did with Omicron, we would have had a campaign 2 that lasted 4 sessions and everybody died after 4 sessions. And then we launched the actual campaign. And I know that was like super trolly.
Yeah.
But we had it set up. We had, James was going to be joining us for all of campaign 2 is James Aronow, who would have, after 4 sessions.
Right. He would be the plant.
Yeah. But things didn't work out.
I've actually I played a con game where the very first scene of the game was all of us dying.
That was Gil, right? Gil ran that.
Yeah.
So he ran that for us at a friend's house, one of those, holiday gaming sessions. And my character as a stormtrooper bailed. He's like, no, I'm out. Right. So my stormtrooper didn't die. But what that did is that on the flip of that game, when your actual players come in, they all get weapons because the stormtroopers died. Right, except for my character who didn't get a weapon because I ran away. That was a great game. Nice. That was such a fun game.
I've also played a game where like you play the start of the game is you dying, and then you immediately flash back and you're playing the same character.
Oh,
and so
nice.
you've seen your death. And so then you spend the rest of the game going like, wait a minute. No, what?
Yeah.
Which I really enjoyed that. And it's actually one of the things, it's a tiny little thing, but in Warhammer, there's every human has a trait called doomed. And what it is there's a religious ceremony when you're, I think, 10 or something. A priest takes a massive amount of hallucinogens and then foresees how you're going to die. But it's this, totally poetic thing. But what it does is it gives the player I'm playing Warhammer right now. My brother's is something like laughter precedes your fall. And so he's always like, no, I don't want to go to the circus. No. And it's a totally random, like silly thing, but it ends up being a big part of the role play, which I really enjoy.
You've been playing a lot of Warhammer over D&D, right? So what is it that sets it apart?
Well, it's weird because it's actually mechanically, I think, more in some ways it's easier, in some ways it's more dense than D&D. It's partly because I just love the world and the mechanics of the game. D&D's mechanics are kind of generic. It doesn't matter if you're in Spelljammer and whatever. The mechanics remain essentially the same, and they don't do a lot of here's how we're going to change these mechanics because of the place you are, and the game, the different worlds don't necessarily, the mechanics don't reflect the world as much. And Warhammer, like the mechanics 100% reflect the world. Like my current party they're all diseased, and like the galloping trots are just running through the party. And, that's like, there's a mechanic part of it, but it's also just weird, low fantasy medieval life. But the big thing that I like about the game is combat has such a fast flow to it, a fast and deadly flow, because every combat roll is an opposed roll. And so I can attack you, you roll better than I do, and you're damaging me.
Oh, I really like that.
Yeah. It's so there's no like I missed. There's no
Mhm.
except with missile weapons, which are a different thing. But like if you are in melee combat, every time you roll the dice, somebody's taking damage. And that's or somebody's dodging, but
Right.
but that gives it immediacy and like kind of a real sense of tension to combat. And then
Hmm.
the other thing is that like it's low fantasy, so there's not much healing. So like taking that 10 points of damage, if you have 15 wounds, you might heal 5 wounds a day. And so the
Right.
next day you're like, wait, I'm not sure I want to. So there's kind of along with Cthulhu, there's a let's run away, I think is a good idea
Yeah.
right now.
Okay. That's good.
And in general, I just prefer low fantasy. I think low fantasy is more interesting. Although, then I just spent 10 minutes talking about the interesting parts of using magic in an investigation. Right. So, you can find, I think, interesting parts of high fantasy.
Mm-hmm.
So another idea, we're going to talk about inspiration. And one thing that Warhammer has that I'm still figuring out is this sense of advantage, where in combat, every time you succeed on an opposed roll, you gain an advantage. And an advantage is just plus 10. So now for the rest of the fight, for the time being, until you lose it for some reason, you're plus 10 or maybe plus 20. And so there can be this kind of snowball effect of, like if we don't somehow slow down that goblin with plus 30 advantage, he's going to like chew us all up, which is a neat idea. It's more limited than inspiration, but inspiration in some form has been around in gaming for a long time. Like I think the first time I remember seeing it was in the old indie game Primetime Adventures, where it was called Fan Mail. And at its heart, inspiration is just you did something cool, do that again. Here's a cookie.
Right.
And what you I think have done that is neat is you've taken you've sort of said, here's like 87 different flavors of cookies, and you don't know which one you're going to get. So talk a little bit about how you came about with how this idea sort of started from vanilla inspiration into kind of expanding it out.
So I think it all started with how we did inspiration on the channel, which is totally different than you would do in a home game. We have how we keep the lights on here, the very bright, oddly colored lights that are hitting me right now, is through sort of donations from the community, from viewers. And we originally started off with you donate 500 bits, which is $5. You get an inspiration coin to the table, which would be advantage on a roll. And as we grew bigger and got a bigger community and a bigger following, you could play every one of our streams. You would have advantage on every single roll. And that just is totally game breaking. And it did come down to players choosing not to do it, allowing that failure, and then changing up sort of the rules of like, well, if you roll a fumble, you can't re-roll,
right.
And just trying to figure out ways so that it wasn't as game breaking. We're trying to move over to, Patreon, where, there's less direct, bits at the table. Oh, actually, one of the things that we even did is any leftover unspent bits went into this pool that would trigger a giveaway. So that was incentive for us to be like, hey, let's let that go over so that people will tune in and get a giveaway.
And that's something
to thank the audience.
Yeah, and that's something that if somebody is planning on starting some sort of streaming channel, think about how that ecosystem is going to work. Think about hopefully your channel will have people that want to give you money, and that's great. But think about how you can make the support meaningful but not game breaking, to Thomas's point.
Right.
And I mean, it's a weirder, like Thomas, you spent more time thinking about that than probably anybody imagines.
And then you also have to think about those, because you want to reward people for being part of the community, for sticking around. And you have to also think about how scalable is that, So if we have 25 people that we are going to, give rewards to and help and thank for them supporting us, what happens if we have 100?
Yeah.
What happens if we have 200? You can't have, something where, we send out a pin to everyone, because at some point that could just get totally out of control. I guess that
You
would
hope
be a
it
good
does.
thing to cross at that point. But so anyway, so I was trying to figure out, okay, so how do we get away from advantage every single roll? And one of them was, we just took it away. We said, no, a coin is a D6 added to, it's a D20 roll. So you add a D6 to it, or for two of them, you could get an advantage. So, we basically just inflation hit our streaming channel.
It's a new cryptocurrency.
And then, and then we got the community stepped up again, and we're like, well, okay, we don't just want to inflate that again, because that would just, that's not a good way to do it. So I started thinking about, well, what else could there be? And then I had the idea of the deck, which was, we were using the Nord Games luck deck a lot at the time. And, and that was a lot of fun. If you roll a 20, you get a good card. If you roll a 1, the DM gets a card to use against you. And that was a fun way to, just kind of change up the game a little bit and bring a little bit more excitement of, oh, I missed, but I'm going to, critically hit. So thinking about tying, that was based on rolls and at the table. So thinking about how we could tie it into that sort of monetization that we do. And it was people being able to donate cards to the table. So coming up with a bunch of different things that aren't going to be useful on every roll. So if you're in heavy combat, a advantage on a charisma save isn't useful at that moment, but it might be useful in a non-combat encounter where you're trying to get information out of somebody. So, having those things where they were available to do cool things, but not every action break the game.
Yeah, and I mean that's another interesting economy to figure out and to balance, because there are the cards themselves, it's impossible to balance them with each other, because something is going to situationally be so much more useful, and you can't do every situation. But what you can do is you can sort of have, you can make these and I think you can make cards that kind of are flexible enough that they can be used in a lot of different and fun ways. And one thing that I think is neat is that you've given the cards totally without explanation, which I think is great, a physical component. So like some of them will say like, you have a little potion, or you have you throw this ball at somebody or something. And I just really like the idea that all of a sudden nobody hey, where'd this ball come from? I don't know.
Mm-hmm. Well, it is called, the divine inspiration is sort of the big, the main topic, and we have a cool, like this card, for instance, it's called Surgical Strike. And you deal maximum damage on a single attack, melee, spell, or ranged. So, that's just a way. That's a powerful card.
And what's cool about that is it's system agnostic.
Yeah. So one of the feedbacks we did get was having a completely system agnostic deck, which
that's hard, though.
I think requires me to play more than 5e as a system.
Well,
to think about how that works.
I've been looking at my deck of inspiration and thinking how it might interact with Warhammer. So,
okay.
There's some very, not a lot of cards would need to be changed tremendously.
Okay, that'd be cool to know. I would love to reach out to them to see what their licensing system is.
Yeah, Cubicle
Um,
7 has been pretty good about that. They do some interesting stuff, but
yeah. When I reached out to Cthulhu, to Chaosium because
yeah,
we play Call of Cthulhu on the
right.
channel, and I thought it would be great to develop a deck specifically for 7th edition Call of Cthulhu, and they were like, "Yeah, somebody already has a license for card decks." Well, okay,
Yeah, they
that's
have it's weird because they have a license for it, but they only made 3 of them and they're only
so
like one is
we
just
could.
a deck of insanities, which, is kind of a little cultural, a little insensitive in this day and age, but
Yeah. I also, also you don't want to break that game either, right? So if
right,
you have a card that says, I mean, it would be, regain 1d6 sanity or 1 to 6 luck. So hopefully it wouldn't
right,
be, reset your luck to 100 or,
right,
whatever
right.
crazy thing it
Or
might be.
like, it could be an increase. You gain an increase to a skill or something like that.
Mhm.
Like a temporary bonus to like you could, or you could even base it around a temporary characteristic boost because characteristic rolls are such a thing now
Yeah,
in
yeah.
7th edition.
Some of them too, I had, for that specifically was negating stuff that would happen to you,
Yeah, that's
right?
a good one.
So,
Yeah,
one card would be, you close your eyes.
yeah. It's swamp
S-
gas.
yeah, that's a good one. It's swamp gas.
It's a weather balloon.
That's a great one.
We're fine. Yeah, I think that's a great idea. Yeah, the negating of sanity loss or something like that. Yeah. There's so I think let me put the link up here. So there's the Kickstarter for the deck of inspiration, which is going on right now. I have the first deck, and I've been, like I said, fooling around with thinking of ways to do it because inspiration is important in the inspiration idea is important in any game you run. Having
Mhm.
a way of telling the players that was awesome, you just did a
Right.
really cool thing and I want to see more of that, is super important. And making them feel good about it. Ideally, honestly, players should be able to give other players inspiration.
Mhm.
Maybe not with the card stuff and things like that, but like if you as a player see somebody else do something awesome, that here's a cookie, and so work that into your game and have it be part of sort of the system of your running, because what it does is it makes everybody want to do something awesome.
Yeah, and that is, originally that was the concept, right? Where in the game that we were playing, the DM, when we made the DM laugh, he would laugh and throw out an inspiration coin, right?
Yeah,
And admit, we're like, okay, so how do we have more fun here at the table? And that honestly, that was a big inspiration for wanting to do something like this.
yeah, and there's no definition of how somebody gets inspiration. It can be for you come up with a great idea. It can be for you came up with a horrible pun. It's whatever. And like at the table, when somebody has earned inspiration. Like there's I actually played a con game once where inspiration. The guy would give you inspiration, and it was like a Reese's peanut butter cup. But the danger was you could eat
Yeah,
it,
yeah.
like you either got a treat or you got to advantage on a roll. And I thought that was a funny idea. I played a paranoia game that had it, but the inspiration was color coded and you couldn't use inspiration you could use inspiration that was not your security level, but you would get treason points for it,
Right.
which was a weird. I'm not sure how I felt about that, because I mean it fits the paranoia ethos, but it also is not necessarily, it doesn't fit the advantage of the inspiration ethos kind of
Yeah.
that was awesome, here's a reward.
So puns were actually, a big part of every thing that we talk about when we give out inspiration. There are great puns that deserve rewarding, and then there are bad puns that don't reward. And Kelly, who is on our Natural One stream, when I was sort of first had this idea, I kind of pitched it to her, and she's like, you should really have a deck of uninspiration. And so, thinking about that and and then immediately I was like, well, we call it a DUI. The deck of uninspiration. It doesn't really fit, but actually maybe
no, it's good, but
thematically
the acronym's perfect.
So that's one of those things where that deck, it's a stretch goal, and I really hope that we can unlock it. And that is one of those things where something happens at the table and everybody's like, oh no. And you draw a card from that. And it's going to affect everybody, players and DM and NPCs alike.
I hope there's a Jensen's disease card in there where everyone has to switch accents for like 5 minutes.
That is done and done. You will get credit in the little pamphlet that we make.
But see, here's an example. Like you could at home, I think a great stretch goal for this would be some blank cards so that people can make their own. Because as you're playing and as your own table sort of evolve, it comes up with its own in jokes and that sort of thing. Like we have Jensen's disease. That is an inside joke that, none of us can do accents very well. And they all start to like weave into different areas. And so that we make that into a card, but you can do the same, at home, you can do the same thing where you're like, oh, okay, we have a whole thing with, people wearing hats or something. So we all have to switch hats or, you can figure out how you do it, but you can make it your own. This deck and the idea of inspiration is a jumping off point for you to do, to make it your own and make it awesome for your table.
And obviously the first ones that we printed up, I went to Staples and, printed some and cut them and made a deck. And, through the course of using those for a few months, half of them had writing on them, spelling mistakes, because that's my signature. Don't worry, the release deck will be proofread by at least 2 people.
I'll volunteer.
And anyway, but those are marked up. So you'd be like, yeah, okay, so I want to change that because it's kind of, it doesn't work, or it's broken, or something like that.
There were some cards that like I'm trying to think of an example of a card that you took out. There was, what was the one?
So I'm trying to think. Well, Tonic of Charm was sort of the it was the only saving throw card in there. And since we have added, we've changed that over to the, to the OpenGL or the Open Game License concept of Owl's Wisdom, Cat's Grace,
right?
Those 5e things in the OGL. But in the luck deck, we would throw things out because we're like, this is terrible. I don't even remember what it was. That's because we threw it out of the deck.
Yeah, that's right. He's been stricken. There was one I think about like doubling damage or something that was just like was great unless you got it and like, against you. Like that's
with a random thing on your person goes missing. It's always the spell focus that goes missing. Oh, I'm sorry, wizard, you can't cast any spells anymore.
Or the book, that would that would hurt. So I mean, the takeaway here is that you should be using some form of inspiration in your game when you're running a table, and it works at cons and con games. It's a great way to very quickly establish a kind of, I mean, it's a little Pavlovian, but establish like the kind of play you want to have at a con game, which can be really hard to like set a tone fast. And so, you get somebody who's doing things you like, they get inspiration, and all of a sudden people are like, hey, wait a minute, I want to get in on that.
This would be a great deck for that. I'm gonna take the playtest deck to Dundracon and wear a mask, and I'm vaccinated.
Maybe 2,
but yeah. And we'll see what happens there.
Yeah, and run some first level D&D. That's the other interesting thing that I haven't seen the higher level decks yet, but like because D&D scales so weirdly in
Yeah.
in terms of there's like 3 levels. Yeah, there's like the first 5 levels it's deadly, and then it's kind of not deadly, and then it's
Right.
deadly again, sort of. And like so scaling those decks is a weird kind of and you can't, I'm guessing you can't just like bump up the power of, well, in some cases you probably can, but you probably have to make new cards for some as well.
And in some of the cases, the card itself is just, for instance, you score a critical hit. That is gonna scale with your level.
Yep.
Because you are scaling that with your level. And there are a number of those cards in here where it scales just because your level scales.
Mm-hmm.
And then there are others that we bump up. You get more healing than if at a lower level.
Right. Right.
But
yes,
but
1d6
there are going to
is
be
less useful at 7th level.
Yeah. So we'll scale some cards like that, but we don't just want to have one deck that just is, the next one is just scaled. We want to get the epic level deck. We want it to be crazy stuff.
Yeah. That's What about have you done anything with so the new version of Paranoia has cards in it that are technically for like initiative, but they also all have on them some thing like, you play the card and you find there's a weapon that so there's like an improv aspect to it of just like you can imbue something in a scene when you use that card. And the GM decides like, yeah, you find what, and so you can kind of go back and forth with that. But I liked that idea. So, whenever anybody talks about yes and, the example I always give is the player saying in a tavern brawl, well, is there a chandelier? And I'm like, yes, and you can totally swing from it, but
Right.
you could have a card that's just like, you can put something in this, you can add an item, a useful item in this scene or something. Lets you invoke something, making sure you have some GM
Right.
control of that or veto power. But that's an example of a way I think that the game, you can sort of even use those cards in a narrative way.
And that, yeah, I'll just agree with you because I don't want to go on.
Going on is like, that's all we do. So one of the things, so yeah, friends, back the deck of inspiration. It is super cool. And the scaling and the different levels is, I think, going to be really interesting. Like I said, I've only seen the 1st through 4th, the one. And I really think with a little bit of creativity, you can mod it for any fantasy game. You can easily mod it for. I mean, I'm not sure, I haven't pulled out my old Roll Master yet to see how, it's going to work with arm law and claw law, but I mean, the concepts are sort of generic enough that you can do that. And it is close to funding on Kickstarter, which is exciting. By who knows, by the time this will go up on Wednesday, by the time this goes up, maybe it'll be funded. Who knows?
That would be great.
But we talked about your new Chaos Agents run here, and one of the things that I think is super impressive is that world building and lore that you have done around this, because that is definitely an area that I struggle with in gaming. That's, not so secretly, that's one of the reasons that I run like 1920s games, because the world is built and I'm pretty much know it, and so how did you, I mean, obviously it started with just kind of those stories you were telling back in your junior high days and stuff like that, but how do you approach world building?
Area by area, I think, is sort of how I do it. The characters are going to go somewhere. What is that somewhere? And then kind of trying to build that out and making sure that, there are shops and people and NPCs that make sense there. And
that's a neat idea. Hold on. So
okay.
Shops, like how give me an example of like regionally different shops, because I think that's a really neat idea that I have not experienced.
So when in campaign 1, when the Foxy regulars went through a gate to Port Thoria, that's sort of where I was like, oh, I need to develop Port Thoria. And I knew that it was a harbor town. I wanted to make it different than Waterdeep, where they had just spent a lot of time. So trying to think about what's there and what isn't there, are and for that one, because it has these gates that were lore developed for a reason why there's a city called Magehaven. I mean, I could go way back, right? So there's a city called Magehaven on this continent that is called Magehaven because at some point there was a massive arcane crackdown on mages, and they fled to this northern outpost where they built their city on elven territory, which caused a whole bunch of rifts there. But I had to come up with, well, why did they hate mages? What happened? And then, kind of working backwards from there and coming up with, okay, so they created these magical portals to different worlds. And one of them happened to be the world of dragons. And dragons came through and wreaked havoc. And eventually good dragons came through and fought the bad dragons and all of this stuff. But, over the course of those, decades, it was really, the dark ages of dragon attacks and trying to. So that was a reason why they were persecuted, why, mages became, kill on sight, and they fled. And now what is happening with those gates? And that's sort of part of the new campaign and part of the story, to a lesser extent, than really everything else. But that was sort of a world big thing, right? So these gates, because they go to different worlds, it's essentially Spelljammer, right? So everybody can come here. So there are people from Eberron and all those other things that
Are
are
there
part
beholders
of
on
this
pirate ships?
well, maybe not. We'll see. If they get to 15th level, yeah, there's beholders on pirate ships.
Spelljammer.
Yeah.
Speaking of the 90s, but so that that's I love that idea of sort of thinking of one big thing and then seeing how the repercussions of that, the ripples of that, kind of, because one of my challenges with world building, I think, is paring it back. One cataclysmic thing is enough. That you don't need 7. They're there's not Mage Haven, Cleric Haven, Fighter Haven. That's
Right.
and I think that's where I kind of err, is that I will just sort of throw everything in there, and then
That's the screenwriting thing, right? So when you are creating a movie, people will accept one strange thing, right? So if you're going to do a movie and there are aliens in it, people will accept that there are aliens in it. But if you, decide, there's also a giant volcano that's going to blow up. Like, why is there a volcano going to blow up? There's aliens attacking.
What about the aliens?
It's
Yeah,
just,
all right, I can see that. Yeah,
just,
that's something that is worthy of like another discussion. But sort of your screenwriting approach to games, and Amy and I have I should have Amy on here just talk about backstory so we can kvetch for an hour. But
she would just say backstory is bullshit, and that's
yeah,
the end
well,
of it.
that's I agree. I agree. But having those sort of rules is a strong word, but having those kind of guidelines that screenwriters use to effectively tell a story can really transfer over to story beats, and kind of the ebb and flow of action. Those are all things that can kind of come over to running your game.
Mm-hmm. The big thing with screenwriting is really the first act, to get people hooked into it, right? And there's always that, what is the inciting incident that kicks off these small characters going off onto an adventure. And that's always something you have to get right, because you can't just, I'm going to go do this because, the game told me to do this.
Right.
It has to feel real. In a screenplay, the characters typically don't act on that inciting incident. It's something, that they have to think about. They have to deny, right? You can't just say, oh, there's a giant shark out there, I'll go kill it. You have to say, well, okay, there's a giant shark out there, but is it really a problem? I don't know.
Right. And that's an interesting point also, because I think another screenwriting thing is that you want your characters to be kind of multi-layered, but in a game, characters are often pretty one note, and it works in a game, but it wouldn't work in like sort of conventional storytelling.
I just looked at my phone and I heard some of that.
It was a great point. Just, you should probably just agree and move on.
I totally agree. Absolutely.
So how do you the funny thing about world building and lore and all this stuff is you make all this stuff, and then 30% of it, like the tip of the iceberg, actually comes into play. And so
I forget more lore than I share.
How do you not just info dump? How do you make lore organic?
Well, first off, I forget half of it.
Well, yeah. Sure.
I mean, which is the downside, because then I'm like scrolling through, my notes, trying to find out those things that I actually wanted to give out. I'm actually starting to pull those out into printed material so that I can say, these are the things I need to remember. Similar to your bullet points, right? These are the bullet points. You have a really great ability to see the bullet point and make it up, or remember it, one of the two. And I see a bullet point, I'm like, there's a whole bunch of stuff here.
Well, you can't read your writing is the problem.
Yeah. Yeah, there's that.
It's interesting. So on Quest and Chaos, this is just good radio, me leaning down like this. So I'm going to be running Children of Fear next, and Children of Fear has an interesting thing where for every location you go to, it has a handout that says like what you know about China, what you know about Nepal, that kind of semi-succinctly goes to the players. Here's things you would know about this.
Okay, that's really helpful.
Yeah, and I'm sort of thinking about how I would do that in other games, like fantasy games or something like that, where it's the same thing. Like, here's what you know about the Empire. Here's what you know about that sort of thing, or what you know about the town of Bogenhofen. That sort of thing.
And a great way to create a game that really facilitates interaction is some characters having that information.
Yeah.
Not everybody knows everything, right?
Yeah.
So, if one character knows about, these 6 hospitals are here, and another character knows about, an underground sort of criminal element, that when they need that's information that can come up in game, in character.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I mean, I think it's also okay. Well, okay. I think it's okay to involve the players in that world building and lore at the table, to be like, if this town doesn't really matter, ask the players what's this town known for? Why do you know this town? Maybe it's because they have got a huge temple to something or something like that. But you can help give the players feel like they have some ownership in the world as well. Mm-hmm. Have you ever played The Quiet Year? So The Quiet Year is an indie RPG that is like, it's like a map build. It's like a map building game for your D&D game, where the whole game is like, we're drawing this map on paper and sort of deciding like, over there is the village of the hill people, and over there is that, and sort of and what that means. And it does a really neat job of communal lore building that I think is I want to fool around more with.
Nice. So when we talk about lore building, one of the things I want to hit on here before I have to go is
That was very
with
subtle.
chaos. Yeah, that's right. With chaos agents, we are doing the live stream, which hits YouTube and podcast. We're also doing a scripted podcast that happens after each episode, and this is a foray that we're trying to. It's radio play style of different factions and what is happening in the world, right? So
From
some
their
of it is
perspective.
some of it's a recap, right? So this last episode, session 1 was a lawyer delivering news that someone had died. And after they had delivered news to all of the PCs, they then came back and kind of told, so he tells his boss what happened. So, we get his perspective of, one of the characters doesn't own a shirt, right? And, what does that mean when they come, and it's just kind of it's stuff like that. And luckily this is going to come out afterwards. So so we have that scene, and then there's a sort of a criminal element that overheard part of the session. So there's a little recap there. And then as I was editing it together and talking to Grant, who voices some of these people, I was like, wait a minute, the last third of the show was this combat between two of the characters and some goblins. So I wrote, and the goblins ran away, right? Because they one of them saw their friend's head explode.
That'll do it. Yeah.
And ran away. So so there's a small scene at the end of the recap. I'm gonna have to say, like, this has been translated from its native language, Goblin. And it's one of the goblins basically screaming about what just happened. So I think it's just weird.
I think that's a really fun idea and a fun way to do a little bit of a recap of what happened and that sort of thing. And that's, recaps and reviewing what happened is also a form of world building, because you're picking out the things that were important in that episode and saying, like, okay, here are the things that you need to remember. That's those bullet points that are saying, like, if you remember 3 things from this episode, let them be this, and that
some of those things change. So I think live, I said this mountain range was the Dragon Spine Mountains. And then I think writing it, I was like, wait a minute, looking at my notes, it's the Wyvern Spine Mountains. I don't know if that sounds better or worse, but I'm like, I messed up the lore saying it because I forgot it.
Yeah.
I'm going to fix it now, and we'll see if that,
You can fix it in post.
Yeah. But, so the character that went around, that actually is played by Grant Corvin. So it's a different voice. I mean, I don't do accents very well. I'm working on it, trying to learn. But now I have to figure out a slightly Boston accent for this character going forward, because that's what Grant did.
Just do ah. Great. Anytime there's an A, just say ah.
Okay.
That's your simple one.
Yeah.
The key phrase to get a Boston accent, every time you're about to say something in your head, you think you're better than me? Like, better.
Think you're better than me. Think you're better than me.
Well,
Where do I park the car?
That's nice. See, you can shorthand it. In fantasy games, you have the advantage of you can be close to an accent, and it doesn't. And you're like, well, that's just how they talk in Waterdeep. Well, you've been very generous for your time. We close every episode with the same questions. So, what is your favorite system to run?
Dungeons and Dragons, only because that's what I run.
That's a fair answer. What's a system you haven't run that you really want to run?
I'm actually interested into some of the Star Wars D6 pool type of games. I think I think that I'd be interested in running.
So the
some of
new
those.
one, the
Yeah, the new.
Oh, with the so that's those are basically the dice from the Warhammer that you played with me with the crazy dice,
Yeah.
turned into Star Wars dice, and they've done a better job on the math because the challenge with Warhammer Third Edition was that over 50% of the time nothing happened because of the dice, and they've now with the Star Wars dice they've done a much better job of doing that math. All right, so the last one is the Space Jam question. Thomas Koch, aliens have invaded the Earth and they will destroy the place where I keep all of my stuff unless you run a wildly entertaining 4-hour game. What are you running?
Entertaining? That's subjective, I think. Wow.
And apparently from your reaction, unlikely.
Yeah, exactly. Sorry, all of your stuff is gone. That's I apologize.
I mean, do you have a sense of like a system you'd run, or I mean, probably D&D because you're familiar.
Well, so I backed the Twilight 2000 just because that was sort of an early inspiration, back in middle school.
Just to show the aliens how badass we are.
Yeah, exactly. We all want to be in Poland left behind enemy lines. That's really what it comes down to.
Here's 8 pages of various calibers of gun. Fear us.
I mean, that is essentially what I took from Twilight 2000 and put into my RPG.
The gun rules are expansive. Well, folks, you can see the link for the deck of inspiration there. It's also in the notes there. And come join us on Quests and Chaos as well. We're having fun running games Monday, Tuesday, and Saturday.
Yeah, crazy times.
Yeah, and who knows? Maybe some more showing up soon. You never know. Thomas, thank you so much for being part of Keep the Game Moving.
Awesome, thank you, Ezra. Appreciate it.
Goodbye, internet friends.